o'clock, so we've got a pretty packed agenda, and as you probably heard on the message, we are recording this webinar. So if you've got any colleagues who were not able to join today or tomorrow, we will be making this recording available for them to listen and watch on another time. We've also sent the PDF version of this presentation earlier today so that you can follow along if you're dialed in via the phone and you're not able to get to the Skype webinar. So we'll mention what slide we're on as we go through the presentation. Before we jump into the content, I very quickly want to give you some tips on troubleshooting for the webinar. So make sure that you're joining the meeting via the link provided so that you can see the screen. Again, if you cannot, make sure that you follow along with the PDF presentation that we sent out. Use an Ethernet connection instead of a wireless connection so you remain connected throughout. Make sure you're not connected via VPN if possible, and try to close out any other applications on your computer. If for some reason the presentation stalls or you have some sort of issue during the webinar, you can always try exiting and then rejoining the meeting. Again, you also have the content throughout, so if you're dialed in via the phone number to listen to the audio, you can follow along. If you're still having trouble, send us an email to the Share Upgrade mailbox with the details of what the issue was, and we'll try troubleshooting with you. And then perhaps you can join tomorrow's webinar. If not, we'll have this recording available so that you can listen and watch at another time. So next, I want to share who you'll be hearing about from on today's webinar. So on today's webinar, you'll hear from several of the Share Upgrade team members, including myself, Mayra Marquez. I'm the Change Management Lead. You'll also hear from Lucero Perez, who is our Training Lead, and Tyler McFeeters, and Casey Carlson will be answering questions for you all. All right, let's go to the agenda for today. So today we will go over the new approval workflow process for every transaction that goes through this. We will cover how approval workflow looks in Share Finance 9.2 and focus on the standard processes. So we only have an hour for this webinar, and we may need to take any agency-specific questions that you have as a separate discussion. So if you do have any very specific questions about your agency, I encourage you to send those to us via email at the Upgrade mailbox, and we'll work on responding to those. We'll cover each transaction type that you see here on the agenda, and then we'll also have time for questions after each type. So if you only do, for example, vouchers, then you can ask your questions about those types of transactions after the vouchers part of the webinar. If you also want to wait and hold off to ask questions until you've seen all the content to the end, we'll have a few minutes at the end for questions. All right, now let's jump into our first agenda item. So the transactions that will go through the new approval workflow process in 9.2 are requisitions, purchase orders, vouchers, journal entries, and budget journals. Note that the approval workflow process for budget journals is slightly different than the rest of these transactions, since the two levels of agency approval are designated by each agency CFO. And this is something that has already been done in preparation for Finance 9.2 by your agency CFO. CFOs received an Excel spreadsheet and were asked to identify Level 1 and Level 2 approvers for budget journals, as well as Level 2 for the other transactions. So next I'm going to highlight some key points about the approval workflow process. So one is we've got two different levels of approval, and for the most part they're very standard across most of the transactions except for budget journals, as I just mentioned. So Level 1 is typically position-based and comes from the reports to field in HCM. Level 2 is going to be role-based and is something that the CFO at each organization has assigned in those user access forms that were submitted in preparation for Go Live. This is also something that can be modified going forward after Go Live, but those initial approvers have already been designated, at least for that Level 2, and then Level 1 for other transactions will come from HCM. Another key part about the new workflow process is that there is no self-approval. That is something that did exist in 8.8, and it is going away with 9.2. The other feature that you can find in the workflow process is that there are multiple level 2 approvers. So in some agencies, you may want to designate multiple people to play this role. Only one person has to actually approve at that level, but you may want to have multiple people to be able to serve as backups if someone is not available. Another key point that you should all be aware of is that there is going to be a 24-hour rule that's applicable to all transactions except for budget journals. And for the first 6 months after go live, approvals will be automatically routed to level 2 approvers after 24 hours if there's no action taken by that level 1 approver. So we've done this in order to ease the flow of transactions and to help people adjust to this new process. So after 24 hours, if the level 1 approver has not taken any action, it will be automatically routed to level 2. And then finally, another key thing to keep in mind is that the DSA Help Desk is available to make any changes. For example, if someone no longer works at the organization or is on leave, and there are any pending workflow items that need to be addressed. The Help Desk can reassign those items as necessary. Next, let's talk about notifications. So there are 2 types of email notifications that you may see from ShareFinance 9.2. So one is that any level 1 or level 2 approvers will receive an email anytime there are outstanding approvals in their work list. So this will occur the first thing during a business day, and each approver will get a list of all of the different approvals that are pending in their work list. What you'll also see if you get this email in the morning is a link to go and view those transactions. So it's very handy in that it'll give you a summary of what you've got to approve for the day and gives you an easy access to go approve those transactions or deny them if that's necessary. The other type of email that you may receive is when a transaction is denied. So if you created a transaction and either a level 1, level 2, or level 3 approver denies that transaction, they will have to enter a comment for why that transaction was denied, and an email will be sent to you, the transaction preparer, with a link to view that transaction so you can view why it was denied and make any adjustments as needed. So these are the 2 types of emails that you can expect if you create transactions in 9.2. Finally, if you are not receiving email notifications and you are expecting them, once we go live, make sure that you work to address your business email in the system. And this can be found in the HCM user profile. If you're able to find this and able to make an adjustment and it's still not working, please submit a help desk ticket so we can make sure that your email address is correct and those notifications are being routed accurately. All right, so next I'm going to highlight the approval style, which will be the central point that you will be able to start managing your approvals that need to be completed. So once you log into ShareFinance 9.2 on Thursday, you'll notice this approvals tile on your home page. And this is going to be the point where you can enter and view any pending transactions that have been routed to you and require your approval. Next, once you click on the tile, you can view the different types of transactions and you can change how you're viewing them. So you can change them by the transaction type, by the requester, or by the date, who they're from, priority. It can be very handy to change that view so that you can organize the transactions and how you see them. Finally, you can click on each transaction and view more details on the transaction and, of course, move forward and either approve or deny as needed. And we'll cover each of those steps in the next part of the presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lucero to talk about requisitions.
Thank you so much, Myra. Okay, let's look at requisitions. So please note that the process that you're looking at right now only applies to agencies that use requisitions, which have 2 levels of approvals within the agency, The first is the requester supervisor or reports to in HCM, as Myra mentioned, and the second one was assigned by your CFO, and it's already there in Share Financial 9.2, ready for you on Thursday. As we mentioned in our approval workflow toolkit, which I'm sure you reviewed already, the first approver's task is to review that the requester should be submitting this transaction in the first place and that has attached the proper documentation. The second level, they need to do a more in-depth review. They actually need to verify, one, that the documents attached are correct, and two, that the requester is using the correct chart fields. Keep in mind that this process only applies to agencies that do requisitions. Well, I want to show you how they look like in Share Financials 9.2. A change that comes is that requesters will now be able to add attachments to the transactions they submit for approval. And as an approver, you can click on your approval style, which we showed you earlier, and then you can select the transaction you want to review. In this example, a requisition, you will click on the header comments and attachments box highlighted on the screen you're looking at. And if you're not looking at the screen on Skype, we're on slide 13. And then you will be able to view attachments. I'm moving on to slide 14 for those who are following only on the phone. And you can see that you're able to click on the attachment. You can view it, you can download it, and you can determine if it is the correct attachment and that you can approve it. If you're a level 1 approver, the biggest question for you to ask yourself is, will the level 2 approver be able to approve this based on the documentation attached to this requisition? All right, so moving on to how you're able to see the approval workflow chain for a requisition. So what you're looking at right now is the pending transactions page, and then you click on a requisition, which is the requisition approval page. And then if you click at the bottom on the approval chain box, you're able to see how this transaction will be routed. In this example, you can see two statuses on the screenshot, which are approved and pending. Some other statuses that we have available for you that you'll be able to see in all transactions are not routed, skipped, and denied. And moving on to slide 16. If you approve a requisition, you can choose to add comments, but it's not a requirement. Note that the budget is pre-encumbered after a requisition is budget checked. So that's before it is approved. But once you approve the requisition, a requester can copy it to a purchase order. Moving on to slide 17. Once you approve a transaction, this is true for all of the transactions, the pending approvals page will display, and you're going to get a message saying you have approved the request, as you can see in the screenshot right here. And I also want to show you what happens when you deny a transaction, because we're talking about requisitions. I'll use this example. So say you click on the requisition, you see that the person, moving on to slide 19, did not attach the right documentation, and so you, as an approver, will need to deny the transaction and input comments explaining to the requester or the person who created the requisition why you're denying it. Remember, the more explicit you are, the easier it will be for the person to edit that transaction. But also remember that these comments will stay in Share, so be mindful of what you put in your comments box. All right, just in case we have any transaction preparers in the audience, once an approver denies a transaction, the person who created it will receive an email notification saying that that transaction was denied, and the email would include a link to the page where the person can update the transaction to make the necessary corrections and resubmit it for approval. All right, so that is basically how requisitions look like in the system. Do we have any questions at this point about and how their workflow through Share 9.2? And everybody who's not following Skype, we are on slide 21, sorry. Questions? Seems like we're doing a great job.
All right, no questions, we'll move on.
We're going to move right along because this is an exciting part for all of us. Everybody does purchase orders, so you'll be more familiar with this. Moving on to slide 22, and I'm going to wait for it to load right now. So you have reviewed the process flows on the approval workflow toolkit, so I won't spend too much time on them because even if you didn't get a chance to look at the toolkit, you have this deck so you can review in depth. So the most important thing to call out for a purchase order is that it may require additional levels of approval based on the purchase order origin code and the amount. For example, if you select the origin code as CRB, Contracts Review Bureau, they would need to approve your transaction before the purchase order, before it's final. Same if you use the code ICP for technology transactions, DoIT will need to approve that. Also, if your purchase order is over $5,000, DFA will need to approve it as well. Moving on. So this is a really cool feature with Share Financials 9.2. So as you notice, the approval page for a purchase order looks very similar to that of a requisition, and you'll notice this throughout our webinar. But once that you see the attachments, I'm showing you the attachments, you are able to see if there was an attachment to a requisition. If you create requisitions and then purchase order, you'll be able to see the attachments. But the really cool thing that I wanted to show you is the next slide, on slide 24. You can click on that little box that's called View Printable Version, and you're able to retrieve a PDF file with all the information you need from that purchase order and use it and save it. Note that this is not a final version of the purchase order. It needs to go through all of the approval process, but you, as an approver, are still able to see it. And I think this is a very handy tip to see it all in one place. This is an unauthorized PO. So yeah, it's not a final, but it's a great view and it's handy for you. Moving on, from the PO approvals page, we're on slide 25. You can click on the approval chain box that I already showed you, and you can view the approval workflow process for that purchase order. Remember that the statuses are the same, so not routed, pending, skipped, approved, or denied. Notice that here you can add additional approvers if you need to add more people to this particular purchase order, but this will not be permanent. It's just a one-time thing that you can add per transaction as an approver. I do want to clarify that in the event that a person is a level 1 to approver for a purchase order, that person would only need to approve the PO once, and the transaction will go through both levels of approval. And if that happens when you click on the approval chain box, the status for level 2 would say skipped because it's the same person in level 1 and level 2. Moving on, you can see that if you have verified that the person attached all the required documentation, and if you're level 2 that the person used the correct chart fields, you're able to approve the transaction. We will recommend to add comments if you want to, but you don't have to. Again, be mindful of your comments because they will stay in share forever. No, that was a little final. But once you approve the PO, you will get that message confirmation that you have approved this transaction, and it will move to the next level of approver unless you are the last person, and then it's considered finally approved. If you want to deny a purchase order, I don't know if this is starting to look familiar to you because it does to me. It's because it looks very similar to what I showed you with requisitions. So say you want to deny, you're not sure, but you're going to review this one, and turns out that the person, and I'm on slide 29 right now, did not add the proper documentation. So you're going to deny the requisition. And so we move on, and you need to add a comment, and be as explicit as possible so you don't have to deny it again when the requester resubmits it for workflow. What you're looking at right now is slide 30 is an example of an email notification that the requester will get when you click deny and add comments. And at this point, I'm very interested to hear your questions about the approval workflow process in general for purchase orders. We have our expert Casey here to answer all of your hard questions.
Yeah, I have a question that's come through the share mailbox. Do all approvers in level 2 have to approve this transaction?
So you mean that I think you mean that it's a group. And so if there are several people in level 2, does that mean that every single person in that level will need to approve that transaction? And I'm going to let Casey, so you have a change of voice.
So the answer is no. If you're in a group, one person from the group has to approve the transaction. The transaction for approval will appear in everyone in Group 2's work list, but as soon as one approver approves the transaction, it is immediately removed from everyone else's work list as it does not need to be approved again. And then we have a follow-up question to that answer. Thank you, Casey. So if there are 2 people that are level 2 approvers, will they both receive notifications that the transaction needs their approval? Yes, in their morning notification email on that day, if it was received in the evening or they had not seen the transaction yet, yes, they would both receive an email for that, and as soon as one of them approves it, it is removed from both their work lists, and you would not receive another email about it.
We have another question on the chat box. Can requisitions also be routed to additional approvers like encumbrances? So can we add additional approvals?
So you can add additional ad hoc approvals for that. So you can do that within the approvals tile. There's going to be a little plus sign before and after the approvers when you're viewing the approval routings. And so you can add someone into that. You can add them before and after any of the levels of approval within. And for requisitions and purchase orders, you can also add them in when you are submitting the purchase order requisition for approval as a requester.
We have another question in the chat box. Do we have to use the deny button all the time, or can we use the pushback button?
You can use the pushback button if you are going back one level. So if you are the level 1 approver, you would not be able to use the pushback button, as it would be a denial going back to the requester. If you are a level 2 or a DFA level, that would be a level 3 or higher, you can use the pushback button to go back one level. And so the requester would not receive an email about the pushback because they're only receiving an email about a denial, and then it would be sent back to that prior level. So if DFA was denying a voucher, it would be sent back to the level 2 approver, and they would be able to either approve or deny that transaction from there.
Marlene, I saw there was a follow-up about whether DFA is using the pushback button or the deny. Let us circle back with DFA on that one, and or can you answer that one?
Yeah. DFA will be using the pushback button, especially for vouchers. They wanted that access. They will potentially be using deny as well, but they would want the level 2 or CFO, whoever is the level 2 approver, to be aware of the pushback and to ensure that the same attachments that are missing continuously they're being made aware of that.
We have another question. When viewing POs, will you be able to view the original after a change order has been submitted? We will get back to you on that one. We'll take that question back, and we'll get back to you on that one. Thank you so much. And I know that we mentioned at the beginning, if you want to ask a question on the line, you can unmute yourself if you're on the phone or on your computer, and you can ask the question. But we're taking questions from the mailbox and the chat box as well. Oh, Ron?
We have a correction to the message earlier about deny versus pushback from DFA, that DFA will be using deny for vouchers.
All right, we'll have another question. You guys are ask great questions. If we need a timely PO and it is stuck at level 1, we contact DFA. Do we contact DFA to release it?
So, as a reminder, one of the key features for the first 6 months is that transactions where there's no action taken at that level 1, after 24 hours, they will be released to a level 2 approver. So it will not sit in there more than 1 day. And if you have some sort of emergency request and it can't wait more than that 1 day if there's an issue, then I would contact the help desk. But all transactions, if there's no action taken at level 1, after 24 hours, will be routed to the level 2 approver.
Yes,
I have
you're aware. Sure.
I have a question. So in a small agency, I only have one approver, and if that person's not here, will it go on to DFA, or what will happen to it?
Is that the level 2 or the level 1 approver?
Only have a level 2 because we don't have a level 1.
Yeah, so the level 2 does not have a 24-hour rule, so that would sit there until that becomes approved.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I know that. Oh, we got more questions. Gail, yes. If after reviewing it for approval, you can access the PO via the normal navigation where you would access and view and find an existing PO, you're able to access it through there. So if you have approved a PO, it will no longer be in your approvals tile, but you're able to navigate to add update POs and find an existing PO and see all the information you need, including attachments and approval history there.
So I have a question.
Yes.
In reference to the vouchers on the deny, I just want to make sure that I understand. So the deny, if DFA pushes it back on deny, it goes back to the originator, or does it go back to approver level 2? Because as a CFO, I'm not going to know, or am I going to get an email every time DFA denies it and it goes back to the originator? Because it bypasses ASD process.
DFA will initially be using the deny button for vouchers, so that would be going back to the original requester, the person who entered the voucher and submitted it. The CFOs will, or any other levels of approval will not receive denial notifications, only the person who requested it.
Okay, because normally it would go back for us to fix it and then send it back, but okay.
All right, we need to move on to the next topic. So we'll have additional time for more questions, but we want to make sure we cover all the transaction types. So we'll continue, and then we'll have time for more questions.
Great. Moving on to vouchers. As you see, the mechanics of, I'm waiting for it to load so everybody can see it. The mechanics of the approval workflow process are very similar. There's levels of approval, but those similar to those of a purchase order. The only difference with vouchers is that all vouchers must be approved by DFA. And I know you have more voucher questions. We'll have time at the end of this segment to ask those questions. And again, if you say you're an approver and you approve vouchers, so we're on slide 33, you can see all of the attachments that the person or the requester made to that voucher, including if that voucher is coming from a PO or you're copying PO lines, you'll be able to see the attachments made to this PO. As an approver, please, moving on to slide 34, verify that the right information is there, that the attachments are attached correctly and are legible. And then verify if you're a level 2, that the person is using the correct chart fields. And moving on for vouchers, you're able to see, again, as in POs, the approval chain. So when you click on that approval chain box that I'm showing you in slide 35, you'll be able to see where a voucher is, if you're a level 1, level 2, or another approver. You're also able to insert additional approvers based on your agency's need. Moving on, say that you have determined as an approver that the person provided the right documentation and it's all correct. You can approve, so you can choose to submit comments or not, but after that, after you hit approve, the transaction will go to the next level of approval or be finally approved this voucher if you're the last level. And as a reminder, again, you're going to be, once you click submit, after you click approve, you're going to be taken back to the pending approvals page with a notification that your voucher was approved. Moving on, again, if you want to deny a voucher, you click on it, say you determine that that you don't have the right documentation or the person wasn't using the right chart field, you would click then deny. And please add comments and be as explicit as possible, because that way you won't see the transaction hopefully more than once after that. And this might look familiar to you already. It is an email that the requester will get. So as a reminder, the people in between do not get email notifications when a transaction is denied. So let's say in the case of a voucher, if DFA denies a voucher, it will go back to the original requester, and that person will get that email. You, for example, as a CFO level 2, will not know when this happens, but you will see the voucher in your queue once the requester makes the necessary edits, because it's going to be rerouted through workflow. All right, so I see your eager questions, and before I move forward to journal entries, please let us know if you have any questions about vouchers and the voucher approval process.
To speak to Ron's point about about DFA never approving a voucher or any other transaction if the agency does not approve it first, if you are a small agency and you have one level 2 approver and you are also a data entry user, and so you are creating the transaction yourself, you will still need to have a level 2 approver. They may not be from your specific business unit, but you will have a level 2 approver. And if you currently do not have a level 2 approver assigned for your transactions, it will go to error, and the approval will be sent to the help desk, where they will be notified that you will need a level 2 approver. So you will still not be able to have your transactions approved without having a level 2 approver. So DFA will never be seeing transactions that have not been approved by an agency first.
So we have a question on the chat box talking about a letter from a CFO to controller explaining the expense. It's from the attachments guide. So if your agency requires that, yes. We will circle back to you on this one. We're getting another question. What happens if level 1 is vacant?
If your level 1 HCM reports to is vacant, it will skip that level of approval and go directly to level 2. And it will show in the approval routing that it was skipped and not manually approved. And the same thing goes for budget journals. So if your CFO does not designate someone as a level 1 approver for budget journals, it will skip that as well and go to level 2.
Right. And Stephanie, you're asking, are we able to make a purchase document or a voucher as a high priority? Unfortunately, no, but a good tip for approvers are to filter or view your transactions by date. So anything that is older than last week is probably a higher priority unless otherwise told so. And we still have the human element where if you need an expedited approval, you can reach out to your approvers because you're able to see who's in the approval workflow of each transaction you create if you're a requester. And if you're a level 1 or 2 approver, as we've shown you through this webinar, you're able to see who else has to approve a transaction before it's finalized. Okay. And Ron is saying if the expenditure requires a white paper, the approved white paper should be attached to the voucher. Thank you, Ron.
Great. We have a question that came into the mailbox. What is the difference between not routed and skipped?
So, you can answer that.
Not routed means that the transaction has not yet been routed to that person. So if it's currently sitting at a level 1 approval, the level 2 approval would say not yet routed. And skipped means that it skipped over that level of approval. So if the HCM reports to was vacant for a level 1 approver, it would say skipped for the level 1 and would now be sitting in the level 2 approval tile.
Yes, Leslie, thank you for your question. So the question Leslie is asking is what happens when DFA sends back a voucher to the original creator? Does the process start over again or do they send it back to DFA? The process starts all over again, Leslie. So it's as if the workflow stops and then once the requester, the creator, changes the voucher, for example, if it was denied, it starts all over again, goes to level 1, then level 2, and then DFA. Oh, yes. So another question, is the budget check process still the same?
For requisitions and purchase orders, you can budget check it manually on the transaction page and then submit it for approval. When you're dealing with vouchers, it is a batch process, so things will go through batch as well as for budget journals as well. All of those All the rest of the budget checks besides requisitions and purchase orders are a batch process, and they will be the same, at least the same minimum timings as they were in 8A and 9.2.
All right, we need to move on to the next section, so we'll go ahead and talk about journal entries next.
Thank you, Myra. So something to call out here, I think this looks familiar again to you. There's a couple levels of approval, and then there's special situations that might require DFA approval. The most important thing to remember about journal entries is that the journal entry with source AGY, they do not require DFA approval, and that OPR or CSH journal entries do not require a level 1 approval. So I'm going to say that again. AGY journal entries do not require DFA approval, and entries with OPR CSH source do not require a level 1 approval. Moving on, as you see, if you are a journal entry approver, you can view the documentation from the View Attachments box. I will say, though, if you're an approver and then you're not able to see this box when you open the journal entry, that means that the requester did not attach any documents, and you can send it back. You can deny it, saying you need them to attach the required documentation. All right, so if you have the View Attachments box, you're able to then access those attachments and review them at length. And if you have determined that this person attached, or the requester, creator, preparer attached the right documentation, and if you're a level 2, they use the right chart fields, you can approve. Again, you can submit comments when you're approving, or you can just click submit, and you will be able to do that. And then you can see also the routing. Sorry, I got ahead of myself because I was too excited. But say you submitted a comment saying it was approved, and then it goes to the next level of approval that you're able to see on the approval chain. Again, when you approve a journal entry, you go back to the pending approvals page, and you're able to see that your transaction, or you have approved that request. If you're going to deny a journal entry, the same rules apply. Please click on the journal entry, and as an approver, determine if the person attached the correct documentation and that they use the correct chart fields. And if that is not the case, you can hit deny, and you have to submit a comment for it. So as we noted at the beginning of the webinar, and throughout every transaction, the requester will get an email notification saying that that transaction was denied. And the greatest part is that they have a link in that email that they can click. They would need to log into Share, and then they'll be taken to the Add Update page where they can make the necessary changes. And then the process will start all over again. When they submit the transaction, it will go back to the level 1 approver, unless it's a source that doesn't require a level 1 approver. With that, do you have any questions about journal entries?
To answer the follow-up question on asking if the email will be generated after the budget check or before, the emails are generated after the budget check. A budget check needs to be done before it can be pending approval, so it is not submitted for workflow until it is budget checked. So it would not come up in an email, that daily email, unless it had been budget checked.
Thanks, Casey. I just got a new question in the Share mailbox. If an agency doesn't know who to assign for each approval level, who do they contact to discuss?
So assignments for level 2 were sent to agency CFOs, and CFOs designated who should have that level 2, except for budget journals, where CFOs were also asked to identify level 1 and level 2. So first, follow up with your CFOs to see who they've already designated for those levels of approvers. And if you need to change that, you can do that following go live, and you can reach out to the Share Upgrade teams if you have questions about what that should look like. But first, I would recommend to reach out to your CFO to see what's been assigned already for 9.2.
Mm-hmm. We have another question in the mailbox. Sorry, in the mailbox, no, in the chat box. If the journal entry affects multiple agencies, like an OPR, if denied, will all affected agencies need to reapprove?
wherever the original workflow routings were going to, it will go through the same workflow routings if the source is not changed when resubmitting.
And we can follow up with that, with you on that as well. Is the employee who processes deposits in share accounts receivable still able to do the budget check, or does the CFO check this? Mm-hmm. So yes, we'll follow up on that with you. So any transactions in accounts receivable do not go through the workflow process. So it should stay the same as it is for you today. And let us know if you have any specific issues with that. But it should be the same as it is today. All right. I'm going to move on. Please keep sending your questions, and we'll read them out loud. We still have time for questions at the end. So moving on to budget journals. This is the one that's a little different than the other ones. So their approval process is slightly different because level 1 and level 2 approvers were assigned by the CFO, as we've been mentioning throughout the webinar. So they can be a group of level 1 approvers and a group of level 2 approvers. And then note that there's also special cases. AGY budget journals do not require DFA approval, but then any other budget journal types must be approved by DFA. Let me just tell you what it means by having multiple levels or multiple people that can be level 1 and multiple people that can be level 2 is that only one person needs to approve that budget journal for it to move to the next level. So that has nothing to do with the reports due field in HCM. This is the only one that's different. Moving on, if you are a budget journal approver, you'll have that transaction in your pending approvals page when you log in and click on your approval style. And again, it looks pretty similar to what the other transactions look like. You're able to view attachments if the requester added the proper documentation. And so if you click on the attachments box, I'm on slide 53 for those of you who are only following on the phone. And then you're able to see all the attachments and download them and open them to make sure that they are the proper documentation for you to approve this budget journal. Moving on, if you want to see who else is in the workflow, you can go back to your pending approvals page to the budget journal that you're looking at, and you can click on the approval chain box that we've shown you throughout. And you're able to see then where this budget journal is. And as you can see on the screenshot, and if you printed the deck, it's right there on slide 54. You can see if there's pending approval, if the approval has been routed or has not been routed. And then if you click in the multiple approvers, you're able to see the list of people who are in that group. So you can always reach out to them if you need an expedited approval. All right, so if your agency does not have a level 1 approver, when the requester submits the budget journal for approval, it will skip level 1 and go directly to level 2. As I said, but I will repeat, if the budget type is not AGY, it will be routed to DFA for approval, like the example on the screenshot that we showed you that you can go back to. All right, you can approve budget journal, and again, you can submit comments if you choose to. You don't have to. And you can also see when the budget journal is approved, because you'll get that message on your pending approvals page. And then moving on to slide 57, you can also what is happening? Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. I think the voice of Siri just spoke wisdom. And then again, going back to denial, if you want to deny that budget journal because they didn't have the right attachments or they didn't use the right fields, you can view it there. You can view the attachments and then click deny and submit a comment of denial. As in every other transaction, the requester will get an email notification when a transaction is denied. They will have a link to make the necessary updates, and then they can resubmit for workflow. But know that this will restart the workflow. At this point, before we move on to the next section, we're taking questions on budget journals. All right, we have some in the mailbox. Nope. Nothing. Okay. Great. When will the batch processes will run? And I think you mean for budget journals or for vouchers?
For all batch processes.
For all batch processes.
So for all batch processes, they are going to be running at a minimum of what they are currently running in 8.8. So they may have more scheduled times for running. Budget check and matching do run hourly during the day, and then there is one scheduled one.
We just got an email in the mailbox asking, can I still view a requisition or purchase order through the regular navigation? And yes, you can. If you join a little later, thank you for joining us. You're still able to see all of the transactions that you have access to going through the regular navigation as you do today. No? Going. Any more questions?
Does DFA State Budget Division have guidelines for attachments pertaining to budget journals for BARs or BARs?
This is not an attachment.
We have not received any communication at this time about that. I would follow up with the State Budget Division to double check what guidelines there are for BARs and budget journals.
Whatever they're currently requiring to approve them in 8.8 is most likely what they'll be requiring in 9.2.
Didn't recall the periodicity of batching in the first question. Batch processes.
Oh, batch processes are going to be run at a minimum of what they are currently running in 8.8. They may have more scheduled times as well, and budget checking is run hourly during the day.
All right, any other questions? We're almost at the end of the presentation. We've got one more slide before we open up for additional questions and then close out the webinar.
And I'll hand over to Myra.
All right. Great. So I want to highlight an important resource that is available today on the Share Information Center and on the Share Collaboration Center as well. So if you navigate to either of those pages, you'll be able to find near the top a resource that's surrounded by a very prominent box titled Approval Workflow Toolkit. And ideally, you were able to review this resource before today's call. If not, there's still time. And I'll highlight some of the components of this toolkit and make sure that you are aware of what's available, and you also share it with anybody in your agency that is either preparing transactions or is an approver. So in this toolkit, we've got process flows for all the different types of transactions that go through the approval workflow. So similar to the slides that you saw on the webinar today, you'll see those workflow processes in the toolkit. You also have checklists for the transaction preparer, the level 1 approvers, and the level 2 approvers. That way each individual in the process understands what their role and responsibilities are in that transaction and what is expected. So use those at your agency to make sure everyone is clear about what they need to do for each transaction. We also have put together an attachment guide, which is a table of the required documentation for each type of transaction. So these are guidelines, and your agency may also have additional guidelines that you want to communicate internally if there are additional types of documents that you want to make sure are included for your agency-specific processes. We also have frequently asked questions, and what we're doing today is any new questions that are coming up on this webinar or via email, we're going to add to this document, and we'll continue to add over time as new questions pop up. But that's a good first stop for checking to see if any of your questions today have been answered, to see what those responses are. So highly recommend that you check out this toolkit. You can download each of those components, save them to your computer, and reference them when needed, and also share them with others in your agency. All right, so we'll open it back up for questions. All right, so one we've got, before we get to Ron's information.
I have that.
Yes, we got somebody on the line?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell everybody that I got an email from my budget analyst at DFA, and we still have to send paper for a while. All the documents still have to go to them paper
Okay,
for a while.
so for
They should use a system, but still send the papers as usual.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you. So from DFA State Budget Division, you will continue as you currently do in 8-8 with what needs to be a hard copy paper.
That's correct.
All right, we also have clarification from Joey that says that the process has not changed as it pertains to budget journals or bars. This is due to a 10-day wait period and will be addressed after go live. All right.
I have a question. Okay, I have a question regarding travel documents.
Yes,
do they
go
still
ahead.
have to be? Do they still have to be submitted with the original signature, or do we attach them then stamp it as an original document for the travel itself? If it's just per diem, obviously they don't need receipts. But if it's actuals, do we attach the receipts too? Because I noticed that we have to stamp them with original, or does DFA still need the original documentation for travel, including receipts, sent to them?
The communication for what needs to be a hard copy or have original signatures would need to come from DFA, as we do not have that information currently.
Okay, so the actual hard copy documents need to be mailed to DFA. Then they just can't be attached, like the ISTE forms that are already signed by the employee.
So Liz, could you look at our attachments guide that in the approval workflow, and then Ron says that original signature count is 35.
Okay,
We'll follow up.
for the ISTEs though?
Yes.
Okay, so the employees don't sign anything that goes to DFA. It's just internal that we know the employees. So I'm not sure which is the verified signatures on those that DFA would have.
We'll clarify and get this information out to all of you.
Okay, thank
following
you.
the website. Yep. Quick reminder, tomorrow's webinar, we do have another one scheduled at the same time tomorrow. It'll be the exact same content, but it's scheduled for anyone that was not able to make today, so you don't have to attend tomorrow if you attended today. But encourage anybody else at your agency who's an approver and should attend to attend tomorrow's webinar. Again, it'll be the same content. All right, any other questions? All right, go live is upon us. We will be live in 9.2 very soon, so look for more information about that. But we're excited to have you all in 9.2 very shortly. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks.